How is everybody? Liking this cold weather?
Yes.
Last night I was out clearing out in the ditch some, so somebody could see the house because it was growing up. Luckily it was cool. That's not a hot weather task. Everybody rest for Christmas? Eh? See, this would be the day I would start shopping normally.
Yeah, last minute's the best. Prices go down, way down. You get everything.
That's not because the prices go down, it's become a procrastinator. Okay, so we've gone through and talked about the environment as far as the pressure that the church had from false teachers, from various sources, and that pressure that it was going on. We talk a little bit more about the environment. We talk about languages. What if we didn't all speak the same language? That could be a barrier. And how we overcame it. So, I picked out this one just to start at the talk. They were amazed and astonished, saying, "Why are not all these men who are speaking Galileans? And how is it that we each hear them in our own language to which we were born? Parthians, Medes, Elamites, and residents in Mesopotamia, Judea, Cappadocia, Pontus, and Asia, Phrygia, and Pamphylia, Egypt, and parts of Libya, around Cyrene, and visitors from Rome, both Jews and proselytes. Cretans and Arabs, we hear them speaking in our own tongues of the mighty deeds of God." So, what language did most likely they speak in Galilee? Up in the north end. Because they're the ones talking, right?
Aramaic.
Probably Aramaic. Up in that area, it would have been some version of Aramaic. So why are they surprised?
Not really educated.
Yeah, what were they mainly? Fishermen, okay. Matthew was a tax collector. We don't know what a lot of them did, but most of them were fishermen. What do you need to learn with language when you're a fisherman? Fish don't talk. You just got to talk with each other. So, they're unlearned from their standpoint. Remember, Jesus is from Nazareth. Somebody said, "What good can come from Nazareth?" So there was a thought there that says, how are these guys doing this? So how diverse are the languages they're speaking? Don't say very. That's my answer.
That's like the whole Mediterranean Sea almost.
Yeah, when you look at it, it is around the Med. Okay, it goes a little bit west, east, not west, and it does go east, but that's still around the Med. But it does go farther away from the Med. Parthian, that's spoken in northeastern Iraq. If you know where that is, it's Persian. I'm sorry, it should have been Iran. Northeastern Iran, Persian. Okay, so their original language they had been speaking in that area. In northeastern Iran was also the Medes and Persians, but it was mostly the Persians. And so that would have been the dominant language. Because remember, I don't think we talked about this. When the Persians conquered lands, you spoke Persian. You learned it, you spoke Persian. When the Greeks conquered a land, you spoke Greek. When the Romans conquered the land, you spoke whatever you were speaking. They didn't care. As long as you paid taxes and you didn't cause trouble, they were good. And as a matter of fact, they employed the local people in the government to be kings in order to keep things running because they spoke the languages, they knew the culture and like that. And they kept things smooth like that. But you didn't have to learn the new language. So that's kind of why Rome has this dispersion of languages, because they didn't force everybody to learn. What would the language that would have forced them to learn? Latin. Okay. The Medes, spoken in western and northern Iran, and it's the ancient Persian more. Okay, makes sense. That's over to the east. Iraq and Iran are to the east. Elamites, Elam, they're in part of the Mesopotamian plain, and it's derived from Persian, because that's the area where the Babylonian Empire was, the Persian Empire, and the Greek eventually was. But they kind of held on to Persian. One note about this is these are the dominant languages they were comfortable with, a lot of people spoke, but they also understood Greek. They had to, because the Greek Empire went how far east? What'd you say? You didn't say anything. It went east. It went pretty far east. It didn't go west. That's interesting. It didn't go towards Italy. It went from Greece and it went east. It went a little bit south because you had the Ptolemies that ended up in Egypt. But east, it went into India. It went pretty far east. Mesopotamia, spoken in Iraq. It's a mix of Babylonian and Assyrian. It makes sense because that's the area where Babylon and Assyria were the powers. The Cappadocians, now we're getting into Turkey. Spoken in Syria and Turkey, it's probably northern Syria and southern Turkey. They call it bad Greek. So it was probably a broken Greek as opposed to a pure Greek. But that's what they spoke. And now you're moving west. Okay, with the names that he had there, they started way in the east, and he started moving west. Pontus. Pontus is in middle to northern Turkey, ancient Greek. So now you're getting more into the core part of what was the world, because this area here that I've gone through so far, when the Greek Empire is split into 4 pieces, which part is this? Do you remember? It's under the Seleucid Empire. So that was split up, Alexander the Greek conquered the world and died. Had his 4 generals whacked up what they had conquered, and each one got part. The Ptolemies got Egypt. They got North Africa. I don't know what his name was, Antiochus, but there was a lot of Antiochuses in the Seleucid Empire. They got a big piece. They went all the way over into India. That was all the Seleucid. And then the other 2 parts were broken up between Turkey and Greek, the other 2 generals. So that's kind of the general way they cut everything up. So as you start to move west, you get more into the core Greek, because that's when they really conquered it early. The Seleucid didn't do too much with the east as opposed to what Alexander was doing. Phrygias, they were born in eastern Turkey, so they also speak ancient Greek. So you can see as they're moving west, it has more of that dominance of Greek. Pamphylia, they're in southern Turkey, ancient Greek, also influenced from an Indo-European language called Anatolian. So that's kind of an ancient holdover. That's a dead language that's still, they kind of mix that in with the Greek. So that could have been called a bad Greek also. The Egyptians, well, not too hard. They spoke Egyptian. Okay, that's the ancient language they had. Ptolemy was not absorbed in the Greek. He didn't make people Greek when Ptolemy took it over. And you see that succession of people. Cleopatra was a descendant of Ptolemy's. So you kind of see all that going on in Egypt. But they spoke pretty much Egyptian. The Libyans, they spoke Latin. Libyans would adopt, whoever conquered Libya, they adapted the language that they had. So they spoke Latin. So you can see the Roman influence there. And if you look at some literature on it, it shows that the people west of Rome spoke Latin. Spain, Portugal, Gaul, which was France. And so you have Spain, Gaul, and Italy. What languages do they call those as a group? Used to call them the Romance languages. And they're all rooted in Latin. That's why my dad came home from World War II, and he went up through Italy. And so he learned a lot of Italian as he went up through Italy. And I remember when I was growing up in Miami, he would speak Italian to a Cuban, and the Cuban could understand him, and he could understand the Cuban, because the languages were close enough that when you said something, it sounded like you were mispronouncing, but you weren't. You were saying it Italian versus Spanish, but they could communicate what they needed to communicate. So they're similar. French is not as similar. Rome, big surprise, Latin. And the people in Crete, Greek. And you can see that, Greek. I mean, Crete's right there, just to the southeast of Greece. So you can see that influence there. So you can kind of see the different languages that were spoken that they were speaking on Pentecost. They didn't have to speak all these languages. A lot of them there's commonality. You know, they spoke some Latin, they spoke Greek, they spoke what would be the different versions of Persian or Syrian. So that's what they were hearing when they came in on Pentecost. If you look at the map, I'm going to turn around for the map. You've got all the places here that I talked about. This is the Parthian Empire. Remember I said this is the farthest one to the east. This is where the Elamites were in this particular city here. This is the Mesopotamian plain where the people are that were kind of grouped together. And then we started moving west. So when we started moving west, you got into Cappadocia, Phrygia, and Pontus right here. Here's Crete. And then you get into North Africa with the Libyans and the Egyptians. So you can kind of see, when you got way over to here and into Italy, that's where you started getting into a lot of Latin. They stayed with Latin. Carthage is even farther over here in this particular area. Remember the Carthaginian Wars between the Romans and the Carthaginians. But then you had all these different places here. Obviously over here in Rome, they spoke Latin. Okay, so you can kind of see that Rome didn't push it much to the east. They initially conquered to the west, and when they conquered to the west, they did have people speaking Latin. But as they moved to the east, hey, whatever you speak, that's fine with us, as long as you pay your taxes and don't cause me any trouble. So that's kind of where they were all laid out. But you had people that were coming from here all the way down here to Jerusalem in order to Pentecost. These were Hellenistic Jews. That's a pretty long trip to go from there all the way over to here, from Pontus to go all the way to here, because this was all by foot. You walked. If you were rich, you had a donkey, but if you weren't rich, you walked. It was a long walk. So that kind of gives you an idea of where they were, you kind of idea of the languages. But there were predominant languages that were used. The top two, Greek and Aramaic. They were the top two that were used. Aramaic was the one probably used mostly by Jesus and the apostles. But Greek was the language of the empire. It was the remnant of what was there from the Greeks. It was familiar to everybody who was educated. So Paul knew Greek, but Peter probably didn't. The two languages that were kind of dead languages are Latin and Hebrew. Latin, it was used in their literature, it was used in their court system, and it was used in the parts of the Roman Empire that were west of Rome. But in east, wasn't used. And then Hebrew. Hebrew was really only used by the rabbis for theological thought. I'm sure when they came up with the Gemara, when they came up with the Mishnah, it was all in Hebrew. But it was done by the scholars or by the scribes that were in charge of worship. So the rank and file Jew probably spoke more Aramaic and or Greek. It's probably a mix between the two. So that's a little bit about the languages and the barriers. In John, though, it's interesting. There they crucified him. And with him, two other men, one on either side, and Jesus in between. Now, Pilate also wrote an inscription and put it on the cross. It was written, Jesus the Nazarene, the King of the Jews. Therefore, many of the Jews read this inscription because the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city. And it was written in Hebrew, Latin, and Greek. What's the importance of writing it in these three languages?
like the three groups of people in some way that have failed Jesus in leading him to the cross. And so Pilate, while he's aware Jesus is king, still went along with it. He wants everybody to know, here's the king, we're killing him.
Yeah. Hebrew. Who was that aimed at? No, the religious leaders. Not the rank and file Jew. That was aimed at the religious leaders. That was a poke in the eye by Pontius Pilate to say, you did this, but I wrote this here. I'm pointing you out because they're the only ones who spoke it. They're the only ones who understood it. Latin. The Romans understood it. And Greek. That's so the rank and file people all understood it too. All the Hellenistic Jews that were there, they all understood it. Okay? So he wanted to reach everybody to say, I'm going to tell everybody who this guy is. So, currency. Money. What they have to deal with, money-wise. This is a denomination, what they were made out of, what their weight was in grams. That's what the G stands for. And then the lower denomination. In other words, we have $1 and we divide it up into 50-cent pieces, into quarters, into dimes, into nickels, and into pennies. And then I took the equivalent value for what it is in dollars. And what I did was I took the Arius, which is the biggest piece, and it's 7.85 grams of gold. And I took gold price from Friday, which is amazing. It's $2,640.50 an ounce. And then I had to convert ounces back to grams. So I did all that. And it's $730 for an Arius. So that's a big spending thing. A quinaris is also gold, so you only have two of them that are gold. It's 4 grams, it's a little bit less, it's $365. But it's lower value that they had on everything. The site that I got it from was all in denarii, because the denarii was kind of a common payment, probably their buck, maybe the equivalent to our dollar, although it's more than that here. The denarii is in silver, and it's 3.8 grams, worth about $29 in our environment. And it's equivalent to 16 ases. Not asses, ases. And as was a denomination. And ases is the plural of as. Quinaris, silver, 2 grams, and there's no quadrans is what's discussed in one of the scriptures. So you can see the breakdown here as you go from gold to silver, now you get into brass. Brass is a combination of what? It's an alloy. What's brass a combination of? What two elements? Copper and tin. Okay, so brass. Now, it being brass, it stands up to being handled better than copper. Brass is harder. So that's, now you get into the as the base unit, okay, which finally get to the as, which is copper, it's 11 grams, it's $1.83. The CMIS is brass, it's down to 3 to 2, and it's now you're down into 1/2 of an as, and then 1/8 of an as, which is a mite or a lepta. So you got to get all the way down to the bottom of the list before you get to something that equates to some of the things we have in the scripture. We have the quadrans in the scripture, we have the mite in the scripture, and we have the denarii or denarius in scripture also. He talks about those. And the most common one that they have is the denarius. But you can see it goes all the way from about 22 cents equivalent today, all the way up to about $730 based on the price of gold. I did that because it breaks down all this here to say what it's worth each one. So that's kind of the way I derived it. You see some things where you look it up, it says, well, a mite was worth 7 cents. But it may have been something that was written 10 years ago. Well, 10 years ago, maybe it was 7 cents, maybe not. But based on the price of gold and the breakdown from an Arius all the way down to a mite, using the gold and the way they did their denominations, it still doesn't amount to that much more. It's 3 times the amount of what you might find online. which is 22 cents. But it's not very much. What I could find, it was made of copper. Don't know what the weight was. But when you get down to less than 3 grams, 2 grams for weight, that's pretty light. That's a small, small, small coin. Very, very light.
Paper clips weigh about a gram.
About a gram? Yeah.
Just for comparison, a standard paper clip weighs about a gram.
So what Doug says, the standard paper clip weighs about a gram. So I could barely feel a paper clip in my hand. So, looking at it, I went and took this particular passage and I said, okay, talent, which is pulled out of here, is 660,060 grams. Gold today was $93 a gram. So a talent is worth about 5.6 million. A denarii, from what was taken from the table, is worth about 29 bucks. So this one out of Matthew, that helps you understand, or helps me understand a little bit more about this in the point that Jesus is trying to make. And his one, for this reason, the kingdom of heaven is like a king who wanted to settle accounts with his slaves. When he began to settle them, one who owed him 10,000 talents. 10,000 talents equates to $56 trillion. Okay? His kingdom isn't worth that much, because kings didn't have that big a kingdom normally. But 56 trillion? Man, no way in the world a person could ever pay that back. But since he did not have the means to repay, the master commanded that he be sold along with his wife and children, and all that he had, and repayment be made. Doubt that was going to happen either. So the slave fell to the ground, prostrated himself before him, saying, "Have patience with me, and I will pay you everything." He was lying. And the master of the slave felt compassion, and he released him and forgave him the debt. But that slave went out, found one of his fellow slaves who owed him 100 denarii. That amounts to 300 bucks. And he seized him and began to choke him, saying, "Pay back what you owe." So his fellow slave fell to the ground and began to plead with him, saying, "Have patience with me, and I will repay you." But he was unwilling, and he went and threw him in prison until he would pay back what he was owed. So what's the point Jesus is really trying to make here? Now that you know that he's been just forgiven a debt of $56 trillion, and he's gone out and choked somebody for 300 bucks. What's the point? Does it make the point Jesus trying to make a little bit clearer when you know the disparity in these two numbers is huge, okay? It's something he could never pay back himself. So it's like, okay, understanding Christianity, we could never pay back what God does for us through grace. It's enormous what we've been forgiven. So if somebody does something against us, it's in the 300 buck range. It's not in the 56 trillion range. But what we've done to God is in the 56 trillion range. So it helps understanding the currency to understand the scriptures and the magnitude of the point Jesus is trying to make with what he's talking about. So that's kind of the reason why I like to study this when I study the scriptures, is because I really understand just the point, how big of a point he's trying to make. So, in Mark, Jesus sat down opposite the treasury and began watching how the people were putting money in the treasury. And many rich people were putting in large amounts. And I imagine when they did it, they'd go clink, clink, clink. Everybody could hear these big coins falling into the bins. And a poor widow came and put in 2 lepta coins, which is also called the mites. And that's why you hear this one called the widow's mites, which amount to a quadrans. Calling his disciples, he said to him, "Truly I say to you, this poor widow put in more than all the contributors to the treasury. For they all put in out of their surplus. But she, out of her poverty, put in all she owned and all she had to live on." So how's your memory? How much did she put in US dollars?
44 cents.
2 lepta.
2 times 22.
Yeah, 44 cents. She put in 2 lepta, or 2 mites, which amounts to a quadrant. Okay, 2 mites is a quadrant. So that's all she had into her name. Imagine trying to live on 44 cents.
It's not just all that she had to her name, it's also all that she hadn't even paid what she needed to pay. That's what she had to live on also.
Yeah.
So she went into debt with that also.
Yeah,
It wasn't
she
just what
did.
she had.
She did. But she gave everything, and that was the point. But you understand, how poor was this woman? Is poor a good adjective?
Destitute.
This is abject poverty.
Yeah.
She has no idea where her next meal's going to come or anything like that. That's the state this woman's in. And she's still willing to give that. You know, what's a good contrasting story or part of the scripture to this?
Rich young ruler, maybe.
What?
For contrast, maybe the rich young ruler.
The rich young ruler was the one that came to my mind. What did Christ tell him he had to do? Sell all he had and give it to the poor. The point was, the thing that was a barrier for the rich young ruler was his money. He wasn't committed. This woman was committed to the point of poverty, abject poverty. And that's the point he's making. And I'm sure everybody's looking and saying, you looked at her. Didn't you see how much money that guy gave? So they gave because I've got the spare change. That was pocket change. So here's what stuff costs. And a lot of things are in ases as far as the cost, or sesterces. Sesterces are pretty small. Some of them get into denarii. So if you want a peck or modius of wheat, which is 292 ounces, it costs you about $60. If you wanted to get a loaf of bread, it's $3.66. What's a loaf of bread cost now? Anybody know?
It's close to the same.
Huh?
The price today, the $3.66, that's about what we pay.
About comparable to what we pay. If you got a liter of wine, could be 1 to 5 ases. It wasn't very good wine. Logan David 2020. Mad Dog 2020. Ripple. Boone's Farm. For those that are that old. So it would be cheap stuff. Now a lot of things about their wine in that particular day was the wine, the alcohol content would kill bacteria. So the wine you got would have been mixed with a lot of water. It would be like cut 5 to 1. Just to purify the water. So that may have been some of this wine. Now the fine wines, the next one costs 30 ases. So it's quite a bit more. That would have been wine, pure wine, wouldn't have been cut. Public bath, you get in for 47 cents. You want to buy a tunic, you want to buy a piece of clothing, but a major piece of clothing, $110. You want to buy a coat in our environment, it's going to cost you $100, $110. A donkey, $3,300. A cow could cost you up to $5,000, or almost $6,000. Oh, I guess you would call a rank and file slave, a little over $14,000. If you want to get a female slave, well, that range there is probably how old she is, how she looks, what her health is. Could cost you up to $44,000. An acre of land, $7,300. That's not out of range right now for what we have. Small farm, $730,000. That's not out of range for what we have right now. So you can kind of see maybe the money wasn't worth that much, but a lot of the equivalent prices that we have. So you can see what they would be able to buy with a denarii. $3.65 is what a denarii was. That's all it was. The kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard. When he agreed with the laborers for a denarius for the day, he sent them into the vineyard. It went about the third hour, and he saw others standing idle in the marketplace. He said to those, "You go into the vineyard, and whatever is right I will give you." So they went. Again he went out about the 6th hour and the 9th hour, and he did the same thing. About the 11th hour he went out and found others standing around. And he said to them, "Why have you been standing here all idle all day?" And they said to him, "Because no one's hired us." He said, "You go into the vineyard too." So, how much did the landowner promise?
Whatever was right.
Later on, whatever was right. Originally, a denarii. $3.65. But it was to the group that was going to be out there for 12 hours. So he didn't make it to everybody he hired. The group he had, a specific number he gave, was the first group that he found that he put out to work. It was $3.65 the entire day. And they said, it's fine. They agreed to it. Okay. That wouldn't buy them too much. That would buy them some bread. That would buy them the cheap wine. And if they wanted the really, really cheap wine, they could get by with, what was that? 1 ounce. Okay, so you're getting down there. Then you can have something to buy maybe for clothes and maybe somewhere to stay. So but that's kind of how that broke down. But it would be basic, really basic living for that particular day. Now when the evening came, the owner of the vineyard and said to the foreman, "Call the laborers and pay them their wages, starting with the last group first." So this is the ones that he brought in the 11th hour. When those hired about the 11th hour came, each one received a denarius. And so when those hired first came, they thought that they would receive more. But each of them also received a denarius. When they received it, they grumbled to the landowner, saying, "These men who hired last worked only 1 hour. You have paid them to equal us, who have borne the burden of the day's work and the scorching heat." But he answered and said to them, "Friend, I am doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for a denarius? Take what is yours and go. And I want to give to the last person the same as to you. It is not lawful for me to do what I want. Is it not lawful for me to do what I want with my own? Or is your eye envious because I am generous? So the last shall be first and the first shall be last." What does the denarius or denarii represent? This isn't hard. Huh? Somebody said something? Maybe I just heard. What'd you say?
Spiritually, it represents the pay that we will get.
Yeah, the payment we will get. Salvation is what the denarii represents. And if somebody is, days from their deathbed and they decided to follow Christ, they're going to get the same thing that somebody who has been following him for their entire life. And that's the point. That's why he used the denarius, is to say everybody understood what a denarius was. It was probably one of the most common monetary exchange units that you had as far as payment and things like that. The as allowed you to buy things that were way down in the noise as far as cost, but the denarii was one of the most common. So you understand his point he's making is it's not really about the money. It's about what your reward was for working for him. It's about what our reward is for working for him. Not that we earn it, but what it's about. So I had another one. So what do people make? A secretary, 15 denarii a month. And there's 30 days in a month, typically. They probably worked about 26 of them. But that would be equivalent to about $438 a month. A lecturer, And the secretary, the reason it's a little bit higher paid than some of the other things is because that person had to write. And reading and writing was a skill you didn't have widespread in the first century. A lecturer, someone who could get up and talk, he gets a little bit less, $350. A messenger, somebody who delivers things for you, runs and delivers, doesn't have to read, doesn't have to write, just have to know where the place is that he's going and who you want to give it to. He's down 263. A fortune teller makes more than a messenger. A legionary soldier who's private. We would call that what in our environment? Huh? Well, it was a legionary soldier, but it was a privateer. It's a mercenary. Okay. Wasn't a Roman citizen, but he was employed. They did a lot of this with the people in the north because they would recruit the local people. But they get $584 a month. Praetorian Guard, who are they? Who is a Praetorian Guard? I'm not going to get through all of this. These were the guys around the emperor. You see, the armies for Rome were not allowed inside Rome. So they created Praetorian Guard. Those are the personal bodyguards for the emperor, which, for a lot of the emperors, they really needed them. So one of those guys gets paid $1,700, almost $1,800. But the legionary soldier that was a centurion, you get $8,700, almost $8,800 a month. So when you look at the scale what people were paid, the centurion, who was over 100 people, 100 soldiers, he's well paid. We would say he's well heeled. He's got money. He's got real money. That's like, it's over $2,000 a week. In our environment, that's good pay. That's not great pay, but it's good pay. It's really good pay. So, there's a couple examples in there where they talk about a centurion, what he's paid, but they don't talk about what he's paid, but who he is. Jesus entered Capernaum. A centurion came to him, begging him and saying, "Lord, my servant is lying paralyzed at home, terribly tormented." Jesus said to him, "I will come and heal him." But the centurion replied, "Lord, I am not worthy for you to come under my roof, but just say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I also am a man under authority with soldiers under me. And I say to this one, go, and he goes. And to another, come, and he comes. And to my slave, do this, and he does it." Now when Jesus heard this, he was amazed and said to those who were following, "Truly I say to you, I have not found such great faith in anyone in Israel. And I say to you that many will come from the east and the west and recline at the table with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. But the sons of the kingdom will be thrown out into outer darkness. In that place where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." Jesus said to the centurion, "Go, it shall be done for you as you have believed." And the servant was healed at that very moment. So what surprises you further about the centurion now that you know how much he makes?
He could have went to anybody, the physicians or anybody, but
He went to Jesus. Yeah, he had the money to pay for just about whatever he wanted. He wasn't arrogant. You know, a lot of the rich, even in our time, but certainly then, were arrogant. They were settled with their money. That's why he talks about it. It's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to reach heaven. Now, this guy was rich, but he was humble. And he understood who Christ was. He was open to it. And certainly the point that Matthew's recording here and that Jesus was trying to make is to say, there's people who think they've got it dialed in, okay? And they're the Jews. They think they've got it dialed in because they can trace their heritage all the way back to Abraham. They don't. They're going to be lost. And this guy who you hate, who's in charge of Roman soldiers that are here to keep you from causing trouble, he's going to be there. This rich guy that's a Roman, that gets paid because you pay taxes, is going to be there. It's interesting because scriptures also talk about another centurion. Now, while Peter was greatly perplexed in mind as to what the vision the vision which he had seen might mean, behold, the men who had been sent by Cornelius had asked directions to Simon's house, and they appeared at the gate. Calling out, they were asking whether Simon, who's also called Peter, was staying there. While Peter was reflecting on the vision, the Spirit said to him, behold, 3 men are looking for you. But get up, go downstairs, and accompany them without misgivings, for I have sent them myself. Peter went down to the men and said, behold, I am the one you were looking for. What is the reason for which you have come? They said, Cornelius, a centurion, a righteous and God-fearing man, well spoken by the entire nation of the Jews, was divinely directed by a holy angel to send for you to come to his house and hear a message from you. So he invited them in and gave them lodging. So, why are there 2 instances involving the Gentiles' response that involve the centurion? Why do you think that's written? This one, obviously, it's written. What's the scriptures pointing out? Kind of, to me, it says the scriptures can reach anyone. Anyone can be impressed by the scriptures, not just the poor, not just people who are looking for a way, but people who actually could rely very much on what they make themselves. And a lot of people do that in our environment. A lot of people did it in their environment to say, I make plenty of money, I don't have to worry about it. Which Christ has to say, thou fool. Tomorrow your soul will be, said, I've got all these barns, I've got all this food, I'm in great shape, I can go. He says, you're a fool. Your soul is going to be required of you tomorrow. Now, why do you call him a fool in that particular situation? What does a fool mean scripturally? It's in the Psalms. A person who says there is no God. It doesn't mean somebody who's an idiot or somebody who does things that are goofy or like that. From a scriptural standpoint, it means somebody who says, you don't think there's a God. You'd call somebody a fool, which is what the scripture is talking about. When Christ talks about it, it says, don't call somebody a fool. Don't do that to somebody, particularly somebody who's a brother. I've got like 30 seconds. I don't think I can get through transportation. I think I'll leave that for you.
Another centurion that we see is the guy that first takes Jesus off the cross.
That's true. This is truly the Son of God.
Or does he say he's innocent? Certainly this man is innocent. And so that's interesting because there's just so many accounts that they didn't really see Jesus do a whole lot other than die, potentially. And that was still convincing for him.
Well, when he went to Sidon, remember? He said, I got to get away from everybody, and went there, and the woman went there and says, my daughter is sick. What do I have to do with you? What do I have to do with the dogs? She says, even the crumbs that come off the table, the dogs get. He says, hey, that faith, I'll reward that faith. So you have these situations where Gentiles are talked about, and the disciples didn't get it. Not until Peter got hit upside the head 3 times. So I'll let Doug pick up next week, transportation.